I still remember the first morning I woke up in this house. The blinds were half open, and the desert sun crept through like it was taking its time, laying soft gold stripes across the floorboards. The silence was the kind that didn't press on your ears, just stretched out wide, bigger than me, bigger than all the noise I'd carried for years. After decades of moving from one crowded apartment to the next, fighting with landlords who acted like I should be grateful for a leaking roof, that silence felt like wealth. I walked barefoot across the cool tile, hand brushing the wall as if I had to make sure it was real. This wasn't some unit I was renting. This was mine. The deed had my name, Marcus Tillman, printed clear across it. A working man, born to folks who never owned nothing but the weight of that debt, now holding a set of keys to his own land. The neighborhood ain't fancy, just rows of small stucco homes, dust carried on the wind, kids' bikes leaning against chain-link fences. But I didn't need fancy. I needed solid ground. I needed to break the chain of always surviving, never resting. Out here in Arizona, I could feel my chest open up in a way I hadn't since childhood, back when I'd sneak behind my grandmama's house in Mississippi and lay in the grass imagining I could stay there forever. My daddy used to say, a man ought to put his hands in soil if he wants to remember he's alive. He never got to own land. He worked construction until his back gave out, then watched from a porch that didn't belong to him. I think about that every time I look at my backyard, patchy, sunburnt, hard as concrete in places, but it's mine, and I'm determined to soften it, turn it into something living. I'd been dreaming of a garden since the day I signed the papers. Not just tomatoes and collards, though Lord knows I missed the taste of homegrown greens. I wanted a place where the roots would run deep, where I could sit in the evenings and know the ground was holding me steady. For black folks, land ain't just dirt, it's dignity. It's saying, I belong here, and the world has been telling us otherwise for generations. Still, the weight of survival doesn't just disappear. Every time I hear the creak of the front gate or the slam of a car door too close, I feel a pinch in my gut, like someone could snatch this piece away. Maybe it's habit. Maybe it's memory. When you grow up watching eviction notices flutter like flags on the doors of neighbors, you learn not to trust quiet too much. But that morning, standing in my backyard with the shovel in my hand, I decided to believe in quiet anyway. The desert stretched out, pale and endless. The air smelled like dust and sage, warm on my tongue. I knelt down, pressed my palm into the dry earth, and whispered to myself, this is where I'll grow. For the first time in a long time, I felt the knot in my chest loosen. I believed maybe this was the soil that could hold me. But the ground beneath my peace won't stay still. The first Saturday I had off, I laced up my old work boots and stepped into the backyard with a shovel. The ground was stubborn, packed tight from years of neglect, but I wasn't new to hard labor. I'd laid asphalt in 100-degree heat, carried drywall until my arms screamed. This was different. This was labor for me. Each strike of the shovel rang through my bones. Sweat slid down my back, soaking the waistband of my jeans. The air was sharp with dust, dry enough to scratch my throat. I thought about Daddy again, how he'd whistle low when he worked, like it kept his rhythm steady. So I started humming under my breath. Nothing fancy, just the kind of tune that makes the hours pass. I wanted to carve out a square where I could start small, maybe peppers, onions, and a patch of collards if the soil would take to 'em. I dug until the blisters started forming, until the smell of sun-baked dirt became all I could taste. Then it happened. The shovel didn't bite earth this time. It clanged, hard, sharp against something solid. My hands jolted. The vibration rattled up my arms. For a second, I froze, staring down at the patch I'd been working. I jabbed again lighter, and the same metallic thud echoed. My first thought was pipes. Lord, the last thing I needed was to bust into city lines and end up with a repair bill bigger than my mortgage. My second thought, buried junk.
Maybe an old car part, some rusted trash a past owner didn't bother to haul off. But when I crouched low and brushed aside the soil with my gloves, it didn't look like pipe or junk. The edge of something flat glinted faintly in the sun. Hollow, too. I could feel the give when I tapped it with the shovel. My pulse quickened. I should have stopped. The sensible thing would have been to cover it back up, pretend I never felt it, go inside and pour a glass of sweet tea. But curiosity is a hunger you can't starve, especially when you've worked too long just to keep your head above water. Finding something unexpected, something hidden, feels like a calling. I dug harder, ignoring the sting in my hands. Each scoop of dirt revealed more of the object. A wide, corroded surface, green-brown with rust. The smell changed, too. An iron tang rose up, old and sour, like something sealed tight for too many years. My heart thudded fast, louder than the shovel scrape. What was buried in my yard? Who put it there, and why? The sun was slipping low, throwing long shadows across the fence. I leaned on the shovel, chest heaving, staring at the strange metal beneath me. My garden had just turned into a mystery, and I knew I wasn't about to walk away. The garden has become a doorway.
I told myself I'd wait, let the ground settle, give my arms a break, think it over. But come Monday after work, instead of putting my feet up, I went right back to the yard with a lantern and gloves. Something about that clang had hooked into me. It wasn't just metal. It was a secret, humming low under my soil. The dirt gave easier this time, like it knew I was coming back. I carved around the edges, sweat stinging my eyes, even as the evening cooled. Each shovelful exposed more of the surface, until I saw it wasn't just a sheet of metal. It was round, wide, a circle big enough for a man to crawl through. That's when my stomach knotted. I dropped to my knees, brushing dirt with my hands, and there it was, a handle, rusted nearly to nothing, but still clinging to the center of the circle. A hatch, like something off an old submarine or bunker. The air shifted. I swear I could feel it, like the ground itself was holding its breath. I sat back on my heels, lantern light shaking in my hand, the shadows making the hatch look alive. Every part of me screamed caution. My mind jumped straight to danger. Gas lines, collapse, even old explosives. My daddy's voice echoed in my head. Ain't nothing underground you need to mess with, son. The good Lord put us on top for a reason. But my spirit, stubborn as it's always been, whispered something else. This was placed here for somebody to find, maybe for me. I pressed my palms against the cool metal. The rust flaked off, staining my skin orange-brown. I pulled at the handle once, nothing. Again, still stuck. I wrapped both hands around it, braced my feet, and yanked with all the weight of years swinging hammers and carrying beams. At first, silence. Then a groan, long, deep, like the earth itself was waking up. The seal cracked with a hiss, and a breath of stale air rushed out, thick and sour. I gagged, covering my mouth with my shirt, but I couldn't look away. That air smelled like history, like something locked away through decades of dust. I stepped back, chest pounding, staring at the dark slit I'd just opened. A doorway had been waiting beneath my backyard all this time. And beneath the hatch, a spiral waits.
I didn't sleep much after cracking that hatch. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan, the blade slicing shadows across the room, hearing that groan of rust over and over. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the dark mouth of the earth waiting for me. By the next weekend, I gave up pretending I could ignore it. I stopped by the hardware store, picked up thick gloves, fresh batteries, a heavy-duty flashlight, and a coil of rope. Years of work in construction had taught me one thing: you don't step blind into a place you don't understand. The hatch resisted at first, but this time the seal gave quicker. I tied the rope to a cinder block, looped it around my waist, and set the lantern at the edge. My heart was beating so loud I swore the neighbors could hear it. I aimed my flashlight into the opening. A spiral staircase of rusted metal disappeared into the dark. Each step was caked in dust, edges jagged with decay. The smell that rose up was heavy, stale air mixed with something chemical, sharp enough to sting my throat. My hand trembled as I touched the railing, cold, slick with years of corrosion. I thought about walking away, covering it all back up, planting my garden right over it, like nothing had ever happened. But my feet moved anyway. The first step groaned beneath me, then the next. My breath echoed down the hollow shaft, bouncing back so loud it felt like someone else was breathing beside me. Every creak of metal made my stomach twist tighter. I counted each step in my head like a prayer. 1, 2, 3. Don't fall. Don't look back. By the time I reached the bottom, my shirt was plastered to my chest, my throat dry as sand. My flashlight beam cut across a wide space, and what I saw made me stop cold. It wasn't dirt walls like I expected. It was a chamber, arched and domed, built solid, concrete reinforced with steel beams. Dust floated like ghosts in the beam of my light. My boots crunched on broken glass scattered across the floor. I turned slowly, light sweeping across the room. It looked built to last, built for people to hide. The ceiling was low, the air stale, like it hadn't been touched in decades. I realized I wasn't standing in someone's forgotten storage space. I was standing in a shelter, engineered, intentional, meant to outlast catastrophe. And in that silence, I felt the weight of trespassing. What I found were echoes of a world bracing for its end. The chamber stretched wider than I first thought. My flashlight beam caught the corners. Low cots lined against the wall, frames eaten by rust, mattresses collapsed into themselves like tired lungs. A row of crates sat stacked too high, stenciled numbers faded into their sides. I brushed the dust off one and pried it open. Inside were gas masks, brittle straps, lenses fogged and cracked, rubber curling like old skin. The smell hit me hard. Rubber mixed with mildew, a stale chemical scent that made me cough into my sleeve. I backed up, light jittering across the walls, and that's when I saw the posters. Pinned crooked, edges curled, faded reds and yellows showing smiling families ducking under tables, white soldiers in helmets pointing toward mushroom clouds. The slogans were half legible: "Be ready, protect the nation, survival through obedience." Something shifted in me. This wasn't just some family's paranoia stash. This was official. The lettering, the tone, the scale, it all hummed with government hands. I forced open another crate. Inside were notebooks, leather covers warped, pages yellowed but still intact. My fingers shook as I turned the first few. Blocky handwriting, military shorthand, notes scrawled about containment procedures, population experiments, and lists of locations. My stomach dropped. These weren't grocery lists or survival rations. These were plans, cold and clinical. I leaned against the wall, the concrete cool against my back, trying to steady my breath. It was like the room itself remembered fear. The air clung to me, thick with it. My flashlight beam shook across the crates, the posters, the notebooks, artifacts of a time when the world thought it might end in fire and ash. But what rattled me most wasn't the fear of bombs. It was the tone of those notes, detached, almost proud. Whoever wrote them hadn't been afraid. They'd been in control, experimenting, planning, hiding. For a moment, I wanted to shove it all back in the dark,
seal the hatch, bury it deep, and let the desert reclaim it. But the thought of walking away clawed at me. My whole life I'd been handed the surface of things, while the truth stayed buried. My parents, my grandparents, we were always on the outside of someone else's secrets. And here, under my backyard, I'd stumbled onto one carved in steel and concrete. I turned off the flashlight for just a second, standing in the pitch dark, and the silence pressed so heavy it felt alive. This wasn't discovery anymore. This was inheritance, and it wasn't something I could unsee. But secrets don't stay buried when neighbors whisper.
At first, I tried to keep it quiet. I went about my days like nothing was different, clocking in at the warehouse, nodding to the fellas on break, keeping my answers short when folks asked how the house was coming along. But the dirt on my boots, the circles under my eyes, the way my mind kept drifting, it must have shown. One evening I was in the backyard, lantern glowing by the hatch, when I heard a voice behind me. "What you got going on back there, Marcus?" It was Carl from next door, beer can in hand, leaning too casual against the fence. I forced a laugh, said, "Just digging for my garden, you know how it is." But his eyes slid past me. The hatch wasn't covered like it should have been. I'd left the tarp off. His grin shifted, curious, almost sly. "That don't look like no garden to me." By the end of the week, I heard it at the corner store, folks whispering, chuckling about the man with a bomb shelter in his backyard. I froze in the aisle holding a loaf of bread, my name hanging in the air like bait. It snowballed from there. Two men I didn't know pulled up one Saturday, cameras slung around their necks. They said they were freelance reporters, asked if I'd give a statement. I shut the door in their faces, but they'd already snapped photos of the yard. Then came the officials. A man in a county windbreaker knocked polite, but his eyes kept drifting past me toward the backyard. He asked about possible hazardous material storage and property rights complications. I told him I didn't know what he was talking about, but he left me with a card anyway. By then, every time I stepped outside, it felt like eyes were on me. Neighbors slowed their walks, lingered longer by their fences. Some were curious, some anxious, a few envious. I caught Carl laughing with another neighbor, saying loud enough for me to hear, "Marcus sitting on gold and don't even know it." Gold. They thought this was treasure. They had no idea the kind of history pressed down there, the weight of it. I stopped sleeping well. Every knock at the door made me flinch. Every rustle of wind against the windows sounded like someone creeping close. My backyard, once the place I thought would give me peace, had turned into a stage, and I was the main act, whether it wanted it or not. One morning, the local paper ran a story. Mysterious Cold War bunker discovered beneath local home. They didn't print my address, but everybody in town knew whose yard it was. That was the day I realized the bunker wasn't mine anymore. Not fully. The story had already gotten loose, and it wasn't coming back. Soon I'd have to choose: profit, silence, or preservation.
The phone started ringing more than it ever had in my life. Some calls came from strangers with clipped voices, offering money if I'd let them survey the site. Others sounded friendlier, dangling promises of partnerships, documentaries, even reality shows. Half of them didn't say who they really worked for. I stopped answering after a while, but the voicemail stacked up like bricks on my chest. Then came the letters, one stamped from the county zoning board, another from a lawyer downtown, both circling around the same thing, whether the bunker belonged to me or the government. Ownership, liability, public safety, words designed to strip me of control. My neighbors had their own opinions. Carl swore I should sell access to the highest bidder and cash out. Mrs. Davis down the street said I ought to cover it back up,
before the wrong kind of attention comes. Folks I'd barely spoken to before were suddenly on my porch, talking fast about investments, partnerships, opportunities. Every conversation felt like someone tugging at my sleeves, pulling the piece right off my back. For weeks I paced the house, restless, torn in two. Part of me wanted to bury it again and forget. Another part was tempted to grab whatever money they were waving and be done with it. But neither felt right. That hatch wasn't just a hole in the ground, it was a wound, a piece of history cut open. One night I went back down with my flashlight and stood in the chamber, letting the silence wrap around me. I ran my hand across the wall, rough and cold. I thought about my daddy, about all the black folks who worked the land but never owned it, who lived through wars and rumors of wars without being told what was really happening around them. We'd inherited the shadows while others kept the blueprints. And here I was, standing in one of those blueprints. I realized then I couldn't sell it off or smother it. That would be repeating the same erasure that had kept us blind for generations. This place needed to be remembered, not exploited. So I made a decision. I started clearing the chamber, carefully moving crates, sweeping glass, cataloging what I found. I called a few people I trusted, an old teacher who ran a small history nonprofit, a pastor who always spoke about truth-telling as a form of healing. Together we talked about what preservation might look like. I wasn't thinking of profit anymore. I was thinking of stewardship. If this thing had landed in my yard, maybe it was my job to guard it, not for myself, but for the community, for the young ones who deserved to see what had been buried under their feet. For the first time since uncovering the hatch, I felt a little of that first peace return. Not the peace of quiet soil, but the peace of knowing I was choosing to honor what others would have erased. But can one man's choice withstand the weight of history?
Word spread again, but this time it was different. Not through whispers or speculation, but through flyers at the library, announcements in church, and a quiet buzz around town. Folks started showing up not to gawk, but to help. A group of teenagers carried out trash bags of broken wood and swept the stairs. Mrs. Davis, who once told me to cover it back up, brought sandwiches for the volunteers. Even Carl showed up one Saturday with a power washer, muttering something about figured you could use it. Piece by piece, the chamber came back to life, not as it had been, but as a place to witness. We stabilized the walls, cleaned the relics, placed the posters under protective glass. My old teacher wrote plaques explaining the Cold War, the fear, the policies buried in these notes. The pastor blessed the space, not as a church, but as a reminder that the truth can't heal unless it's spoken. The first time I opened the hatch to a group of students, my hands shook. They shuffled down the stairs, wide-eyed, whispering like the air itself demanded reverence. When their sneakers hit the floor and they began reading the displays, one boy looked up at me and said, "This really happened?" I nodded. My throat caught, but I managed right here, under our feet. Their faces told me everything. Shock, curiosity, a quiet respect. They weren't laughing or joking about treasure. They were listening. Officials still tried to push back, sending notices, threatening safety code violations. But the community spoke louder. Church groups, teachers, local journalists, they rallied, calling it a historical site, a memorial worth keeping. Every voice added weight until the county backed off. And me? I stopped thinking of myself as a man who just bought his first home. I was a custodian now, a steward of memory. I never got my vegetable garden, not in the way I first imagined, but standing at the hatch, hearing voices echo below as people learned what had been buried, I realized I had grown something deeper. Roots. Not just mine, but a whole community's. I set out looking for quiet soil, a place to rest. Instead, I found a truth that demanded tending. My peace didn't come from silence. It came from giving voice to what was hidden, letting memory bloom where seeds never took root. And yet, some secrets down there
still wait to speak.